Hi, and welcome to today's edition of the Pinniped Community Meeting. Today is September 16th, 2021. If you're watching this from home, we encourage you to come join us live. We meet on the first and third Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific time. It's an opportunity to listen to what the maintainers are working on, provide live feedback, ask questions, or get live help with Pinniped. If you aren't able to attend live, you can also find us on the Kubernetes Slack workspace, in the Pinniped channel, and on Twitter at Project Pinniped. When you attend these meetings, we ask that you please abide by the code of conduct. If you have anything you wish to discuss with the team, please add that to the discussion topic section at the end of the agenda. We also ask that you add your name and organization to the document so that we know who's attending and keep lines of communication open. You can also add a comment to the GitHub discussion talking about how you use Pinniped and include your company's logo so we can promote your organization and learn more about how people use Pinniped. For the announcements, we have a couple talks coming up. So one of them is Mo and I are talking at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con. It's on October 15th, 2:30 to 3:05. You can register to attend virtually or in person. And also at a co-located event at Cloud Native Security Con. There will be a lightning talk presented by Mo and Anjali. Do we have any other announcements? Probably all. So then on to the project roadmap updates. Coming up, we are planning on doing some security hardening work. There's a few things that could be included there. One of them being upstream refresh. So tying supervisor refresh tokens to an upstream session. And then the other thing coming up would be OpenShift support in the concierge.
Those dates look incredibly aggressive. It says September of this year. That is 2 weeks away. I do not expect either one of those to be done in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, that might be pushed back a little bit because we've got these talks coming up. We have...
And for other VMware folks, right? VMware World is coming up. So just in general, this is a very conference heavy time for VMware.
Yeah, so and we did move multiple IDP support back for now. So if anyone in the community has feelings about multiple IDP support, if you are looking forward to that, let us know. We deprioritized it.
For context for anyone watching the recording, we're trying to get more customer feedback and an understanding of the use cases before we progress with that work. And so while we're doing that, we already have at least some sense for various compliance and security requirements. So that allows us to work towards the security hardening work, which I don't think anyone will mind if that is more secure. So it's not that we don't plan on doing that work. I think we're trying to prioritize it with other things and make sure we're doing the right work.
Do we have any other status updates? Other things the team is working on we could talk about?
We fixed some bugs.
Yeah, planning on putting out a bug fix release hopefully today. We found a couple of bugs in the 0.11 release, one of which was with validation using kubectl apply. Unfortunately, we mostly use cap on our team and in our tests, so we didn't catch that. Something you can work around by just not validating everything, but still unfortunate. And then another bug related to updating or deleting and recreating the bind secret for Active Directory, sort of messing up some caching. One also has a workaround. If you delete a pod, then it should get recreated because it's part of a deployment and should refresh itself. So it's annoying and weird, and will be fixed soon. But those are the workarounds.
Ryan, did you want to talk about the selector fix that you have done?
Sure. So we spotted, actually Mo spotted a bug, made a mistake in our service and deployment selectors. When you run the Pinniped concierge, you're running typically a couple of pods that provide the backend services for the concierge, API endpoints and REST endpoints. And you're also running typically another pod that we call the kubecert agent. That pod has very limited responsibilities and it does not serve the same REST and API endpoints as the main pods. But unfortunately, our selectors for our services and deployments were accidentally also selecting that pod. So depending on how your request routing is configured in your cluster, it's possible that some of your requests might have been accidentally sent to that pod and that pod would not be able to service them. So this would be evident to an end user if they tried to perform a login through the Pinniped kubectl plugin and they got messages about the service not being available. And typically they would see that message about 1/3 of the time if they were affected at all. And so we believe that we have fixed that bug in the upcoming release that we're about to put out.
A related point, if you were using cap, you would never have this issue because cap hid it. That's why we never saw it, because we deploy using cap, and cap does some extra stuff that suddenly changed the way this was working, so it never was there. But if you use kubectl to deploy our code, then the behavior was there and could manifest. One of the things we did is we turned off that one particular piece of magic in cap to make it so that if we screw this up, we'll notice it this time. So yeah,
It's sort of a trend of us a couple of these bugs being kubectl specific and it's not testing them well.
Yeah, that's helpful information. That was what I was gonna clarify with y'all. So thanks for saying that.
Do we have anything we want to discuss today?
I know one of my action items, not last meeting, but the meeting before that, was to start writing a design for like getting cube configs from the supervisor effectively. I started on it, but it's just a little too early. Like, I can talk about it, like, I have it in my head if people want to talk about it, but it's probably not digestible in that form. I feel like some written text with some diagrams and some to actually understand what I'm talking about. So if folks are interested, I'm willing to talk about it, but excited to discuss that.
Sure. Yeah, if you think it would be interesting, people listening would find it interesting as well.
Is that something that we're probably not going to work on for several months? I wonder if we should save that for a later community meeting, or it's closer to being prioritized.
I mean, it depends, right? Our priorities after the security hardening are a little open-ended, I think, right now. It really depends. If we want to significantly improve the open source experience and start forcing our downstream integrators to sort of coalesce into one way of doing this, it's probably important. But yeah, it depends. Certainly, I expect it to significantly improve the user experience for the entire class of people. So Margot, I don't know if I understood. Did you want to talk about it or did you not want to talk about it? I'm not exactly sure.
Sure, let's talk about it.
Okay.
Any other
So the high-level problem statement is if you have a running supervisor somewhere, and that supervisor has valid certificates, which you should always, because we expect people to use it in the browser. So if you don't configure it that way, nothing good is going to come out of it. And your IT administrator somehow tells you the URL of the supervisor. Maybe something like Kubernetes auth.company.com. So something that's sort of easy for you to remember. Given just that information, you should be able to log into your cluster. Or sorry, you should be able to log into all clusters in that environment. Okay. That's sort of the ask of this functionality. All you have is the URL of the supervisor. Okay. So obviously today that is impossible because the APIs to do this don't exist. So the missing pieces there are some way for the supervisor to understand that clusters exist and how to generate kube configs for them. So I thought about a variety of ways that this could be built. So pretty immediately, from a user-facing perspective, any API that we add on the supervisor has to be part of the federation domain, because that's basically what we just said, right? The design is immediately limited by that. The user does not know the Kubernetes cluster underneath or the fact that it even is a Kubernetes cluster. Right? They only have access to the federation domain. Right? They don't have any cluster level access. So we would have to build APIs on the federation domain that did something like this. Right? Everything else we could probably hide pretty neatly as like admin facing config could be just, CRDs as they are today. Even any concierge level config could be CRDs or aggregate APIs, whatever makes sense in the particular context. But there has to be something on the federation domain to give you this information. Theoretically, if you wanted to be really awful, you could try to hack the existing endpoints to return extra data. But I think that's still compliant with the OIDC spec to send extra bits back. I would say don't do that. It just seems like a hack. Also, since we can add extra endpoints to the federation domain as we want, not really sure we would want to just hack on stuff to like the code response or something. So the way I thought about this in my mind was I wanted the experience for the IT admin to be as painless as possible. And I wanted to encourage those individuals not to be afraid to change their mind about the configuration of their environment. By that, what I mean is, if you, for example, are using the impersonation proxy today, and you hand out 2 configs from that, if you want to change the certificate, serving cert of the impersonation proxy, for whatever reason, that's disruptive to your users. So you're basically encouraged never to do that. Right? In the same way, if we add the short-lived certificates flow for like environments like GKE using the CSR API, you're still encouraged not to use that new flow because you break existing users that are using the impersonation proxy. Okay? So to make it so that those decisions are less set in stone, I wanted to come up with a way for, instead of the IT admin like somehow registering a cluster like statically, I wanted that to be much more dynamic. So the way I formulated that in my mind is, you're not even really registering a cluster, you're registering a particular concierge. You can have more than one cluster, and that's totally fine. Right? Or more than one on a different API group. Right? So the way I formulated this is, Kubernetes exposes a OIDC compatible discovery endpoint that lets you figure out the issuer and key IDs for the service account signer. And so you can read that. Right? Basically, building off of that, you can imagine an API where an IT admin registers on the federation domain the intent to have a particular concierge be part of that federation domain. And then on the other side, the concierge registers that federation domain much more specifically than a Java authenticator does today. Like it's explicitly saying, I want to use this supervisor, and that the federation domain that I'm talking about is this one.
You're not just saying this is the endpoint, you're saying like this specific.
Yeah, you can start making assumptions in your code about, well, like this is a supervisor federation domain and not just like Google's endpoint or something. So once you have that, you can effectively build a handshake between those components. And so the supervisor can validate that a concierge is trying to talk to it and which concierge it is. And you can validate a service account token coming in from that concierge as a way of saying you are indeed the concierge that I think you are, right? So then the information that the concierge sends it is at least somewhat trustworthy. I think there's still some careful design work there. For example, the audience always has to come from the supervisor. It can't come from the concierge. So this would end up being a bidirectional API. Right? So like the concierge would say, I would like to be part of your federation domain, and the federation domain would be like, cool, here's your audience. Right? Once all that stuff is done, but like there would be an initial registration, and then like there would have to be some mechanism for this to be kept up to date. So that way, if the concierge changes its configuration over time, yes, your kube config might become invalid, but the act of fixing the kube config is very trivial. Just run like, I don't know, Pinniped supervisor login, paste the URL. That's it. Like your stable endpoint is the federation domain and not any particular kube config, which I think would be a pretty nice sort of middle ground. That way, if you know, if an IT admin migrated away from the impersonation proxy to like the new flow, they could leave the impersonation proxy working, but the new flow would be the preferred approach, so that when users did run that command again, they would get a better kube config the next time around. Right, so then they can build a buffer, right? They could say, you have 1 month or n number of months before the kube config will stop working. And this is what we have done in our commercial products before for our SaaS offerings. It was when they migrated from the old concierge, the .4 branch, where it was the concierge was namespace, the APIs were all namespace scope to the cluster scope. Since that was a breaking change, they ran both the old and new versions of the concierge in those environments, and basically told customers they had a couple of months to upgrade. Like they just needed to run the command again to get a new kube config, and that allowed them to sort of do that kind of transition. That's the kind of flow I'm thinking. It's basically a very limited configuration on the part of the IT admin, right? Like basically saying, this is how you find the concierge, and like on the concierge side, this is how you find the supervisor, and the rest is dynamic config that's sort of handshake and agreed upon by those components. And once you have that, then you don't really have to maintain it over time, right? The components have to maintain it over time. So as we evolve them, they can keep them.
Just not sure if I'm totally following. So in this world, would it still be the IT admin passing out the new kube config, or would users be able to bypass that? That's okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, the IT admin could always hand out a kube config if they wanted to, because there's nothing private about that. But you don't need to anymore, right? The thing you need to hand out is the federation domain issuer URL of the supervisor, and the knowledge of typing in like some Pinniped command, like Pinniped supervisor login.
So it's like slightly more knowledge of, using the Pinniped CLI versus now.
Yeah, it's
you
more
literally
of
don't
like,
have to use it directly at any point, but
yeah, you know, like how you log into like the G Cloud CLI, right? Like you have the concept of logging in and asking for kube configs back, right? This is in that same lane, right? Like you log in, and there's no reason that you have to keep the name of the Pinniped CLI like Pinniped, right? You could rename it to something that made more sense in your environment. But the idea is to instead of saying you somehow get a kube config and you use it, the idea is you're saying you log into your Kubernetes environment, and then you can pick which cluster you want to use, right? So like once you have this, right, you can have higher order APIs on the federation domain that are like, I would like to get all the clusters. Cool, I see I have 7. I would like a kube config for the one called dev7 or whatever, right? And you can do that in the same way that you can do today for like G-Cloud and stuff, right? And that's I think that's a much nicer and easier to explain experience than somehow you get a kube config handed to you by your IT admin, which is like the sort of approach that's available today in the open source.
cool.
I realize there's like a lot of like missing details because it's like we need like many diagrams to really explain. Yeah, that's sort of what I've been imagining. Folks have ideas or feedback, and I was open to listen.
The broad strokes sound great. There's some details to be worked out around I guess primarily how the registration would work and how the concierge and the supervisor would potentially talk to each other. Network topologies may or may not allow that, and how to secure it, how to prove that the concierge that's talking to the supervisor is truly the correct concierge and not some imposter, etc. But the broad sort of cool.
The security stuff
experience sounds cool.
Yeah, the security stuff I'm not worried about because that's what the service account issuer discovery was built to handle, which is workload identity, rather than concierge is just a workload. So that part is relatively straightforward. The what was it? The actual APIs for doing this, much more sort of open-ended. The other bit that's kind of interesting and weird is like the way we would write the code for this, like in the way we want today, would be like controllers doing all this. But that would mean that the federation domain would have to support list and watch, which is not necessarily easy. It's not necessarily hard either. But if we wanted to actually continue to write controllers for all this stuff, we would have to have that semantic available. We could always just do polling and just say, take some time, take some number of minutes or whatever for it to figure out if we can make changes. And that might be okay. Network topology has also been on my mind. Like we already have a requirement that the concierge must be able to talk to the supervisor, because otherwise the discovery would fail. There's no way to work around that really.
We have that requirement today, although we've contemplated removing that requirement because you could just register your JOCs with the JOT authenticator, and then there would be no need to have that directionality of network connection anymore.
Yeah, but I would point out that that hasn't actually really been a problem.
Yeah, we haven't built that feature yet.
No, I'm saying no one has even asked. Like we have thought about it because it's like not a bad thing to build, but no one has asked explicitly either. Right? Like the closest I've heard for like network topology is like, please like stop deploying this other image for your KubeCert agent or something. Like basically I want all the images to be locally hosted on my kubelet. Stop trying to fetch stuff because there is no network on the kubelet to fetch anything. So that makes sense, right? It's a disconnected environment, so it can't hit the internet, right? But it's not disconnected from the supervisor. Since like the whole like JOCs endpoint and stuff, right? Like they exist as endpoints to allow for rotation, right? So like there is some gotcha, right? If you statically specify the JOCs, now you're responsible for manually doing rotation somehow, which generally means people will never rotate the keys. So it's not exactly awesome. But yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious to hear people's feedback when watching this about, would there be concerns about the supervisor reaching out? Actually, I'm trying to think. You could still build this where the directionality was only from the concierge if you wanted to open a tunnel from the concierge to the supervisor and then reverse it and talk back through the tunnel. That's what we do in our SaaS products today, is that the agents running on the cluster talk back to the SaaS, but not the other way. But that channel is bidirectional once it's built. So we could build the same thing if we wanted.
Yeah, that could make sense. It would also, I suppose, make sense for this to be an optional feature that you don't have to use if you don't want to. So if you really wanted to air gap your network and lock everything down, you could just choose not to use this feature.
Yeah. One of the goals I wrote out, and like I was trying to write this out kind of like I would write a Kubernetes cap. So I was like writing out goals and non-goals, and one of my explicit non-goals was make sure nothing that exists today breaks in some way. So like, if you just want to do what you've been doing, you should be able to just keep doing that. So all the existing Pinniped CLI commands should just keep working. Because there's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly fine. Good commands. They work well. This is more meant as a user experience booster on top of those. But yeah, I totally agree. We should. It's opt-in, not opt-out. Or yeah, it's opt-in if you want it. But the stuff that exists today should work as nicely as it has always worked. Anyone have any thoughts? Andrew, Ben, haven't heard from y'all.
I knew you were gonna ask that question, and so I tried to come up with an answer, but I really don't have any thoughts. I mean, I don't have any knowledge of use cases that would help here, and it seems like it generally improves the security posture and user experience, so I'm in. I don't have any specific feedback though.
Yeah, I guess what I would kind of ask there is, so like I know like the Tanzu CLI has functionality sort of like this, using I think cluster API as a backend. So this would be I'm not sure how we would frame it. Certainly there's like we just said, there's no requirement that you would have to use it, so you wouldn't have to use it downstream. It would be an option if it made sense, if it improved the UX for our downstream consumers.
Yeah, I think I'd have to like think through the whole user experience from the perspective of this particular downstream project. It also, like, by the time this feature is shipped, there may be other changes in this particular downstream project's configuration and vision. So well, I know this won't be the last conversation that we have about this.
Anjali, did you have any high-level feedback or anything?
No, this looks great, especially from a user point of view. So are you going to be documenting the design more as next steps?
Yeah, I think hopefully by next community meeting, I should have the design written up, or at least enough that there is like something someone could comment on. And I can share that out with folks hopefully before the meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah. Sounds cool. I'm interested in seeing what like seeing those details kind of hammered out. Do we have anything else we want to talk about today? If not, we can give everyone a few minutes back. Thanks everyone for joining the Pinniped community meeting. If you're watching from home, we'd love for you to join us live next time. Until then, take care.
Thanks, help.